Yeah, so building forms and relationships. Most of this session is going to be about how do you structure those data relationships in your creator application. So the main thing that you need to know when you're building your forms is that the structure of your form dictates the structure of your data. And so it's very important when you're building your forms that you use the right field for the right thing. Because if you use the wrong field, then your data is going to be a lot harder to work with when it comes time to create a workflow or write some deluge script. And it's just going to make it harder to maybe even access your data. All right, so let's actually jump into a live example. So IT service application where we need to be able to have customer service requests and keep track of all of the jobs that we've done. So that means we also need to keep track of which employees have done those jobs, which customers did we do those jobs for, and also maybe even like invoicing at the end of the month. We want to be able to show the customer all of the work that we did for them. So most of that application I have already built, which is nice. So we don't have to sit up here and watch me build like 5 forms. But one form I left out. And so the customer's entity is what I'm going to show you how to build. So I'll switch over here. This is my creator app in the builder mode, and this is my creator app in the live mode. So we can see there's already an employees section. We have a thing for items. And we have some data already entered in here. So these are like the different items we might install in someone's office. And then, like a jobs form. So that's what we already have. Let's go ahead and add in that entity for keeping track of our customers. So when you do this, you just click the plus button when you're on that builder screen. And then you choose to build a new form. And then there's a few options here. Most of the time, you're probably just going to choose blank and start from scratch. Sometimes you may already have a spreadsheet with a bunch of customers and you just want to import that to get yourself started. Then you would choose import with data. So I'll choose blank and I will give my form a name. So I'll call it customers and I'll hit create form. And now it takes me onto the form builder screen. So if we go back to that entity diagram, we want to know basically the essential contact info on our customers, their first and last name, their email, their phone, their address, stuff like that. And so Creator now gives us a lot of these basic fields automatically. So we have a name field, I could drag on an email field, a phone field, an address field, and it's important to remember to use the right field for the right thing here because it'll actually make your application a little bit better, right? So if you use the email field for your emails, then it will automatically detect that this has happened because it'll go, hey, there's no @ symbol in this name, and it'll give that user of your app an error message and tell them, they haven't entered a valid email, and then they'll go, oh no, what am I doing? Same idea for like phone field. It's going to check that somebody has entered something that reasonably resembles a valid phone number. And then also for the address field, if we come over here on the right side of the screen, we'll see that it actually puts a bunch of like tiny fields inside that one. So it'll separate out like the street address from the city, from the state, from the postal code. And so the beauty of this is that it is a much faster way to capture that information in a very granular way. And so it'll be more useful when we are writing our workflows later on. Okay, so those are the basic fields that we would maybe want to collect some information about a customer. So what were some of the other things we wanted to know? So maybe their company or the service plan that they have that they've signed up with us. So to collect the company, obviously we don't have necessarily a company field in here, but I would just drag on this single line field. And so this is just a basic text field. And then over in the upper right, this is where I go and rename it and just call it company. And when I hit enter, it updates right here. So that tells everyone what they're supposed to put in there. Okay, so the thing that people get tripped up with when they're first learning to build their forms is that we offer a bunch of different ways to give your users like a list of options to pick from. So we have the drop-down, multi-select, radio, checkbox. And they don't really know when they're getting started, like which one should I choose for which situation. So basically, what you need to know is that the dropdown and the radio are both single select fields. And so what that means is you're given a list of options, you're only allowed to pick one. If you use a multi-select or a checkbox, then you can choose more than one option. So one thing you don't want to do is, for instance, drag on your checkbox field and go, all right, this seems like the right thing, so I want to give somebody like a yes and a no option on that field. And if I switch over to the live mode of my application, we can now see what I've built so far. So there's the name, breaks it down into first and last name, email, the phone number, which comes with a country code picker, the address, which is broken down and lets me choose from a list of countries and search for the one that I'm looking for. But let's just take a look at the checkbox real quick. So this seems like the right field for like a yes or no option, but the problem is that it's multi-select. So it lets me check both of these boxes. And so that is why it is very important to make sure that you end up with the right field for the right thing that you're trying to collect, because otherwise you can get some weird data in your application. So then the other question is, why do we have two single select fields and two multi-select fields? Why would I ever want two different options? So the reasoning here is that the checkbox and the radio are what you use if there's only a very small set of options to choose from. You might want to use those, because it will display them on the field. Somebody doesn't have to click into a menu and then click again to make their selection. It's just going to lay it all out right there. So it's a little bit faster if you have few options. What if I have like 20 or more options? Do I want my form that's like this tall to suddenly be this tall? Absolutely not. So that's why we also have the multi-select and the drop-down, which basically condense everything down and give you a list to choose from, so it doesn't take up as much room, and it makes it a lot more convenient if there's a lot of options to pick from. Okay, so I could add on a drop-down for the service plan that the customer has, and then I can come over here in the field properties, and I can say, hey, we have a gold plan, and a silver, and a bronze. And if I wanted to add more, I could just click this plus button and type bad plan or something. And I can also just rearrange these if I want to as well. So I can click and drag those, and that's basically how that works. And you can make it alphabetical automatically. That's nice. Okay, so coming back over to this entity, we've built most of this. When I look at the form builder, it's just giving me these tiny little icons that indicate what type of field I have used. And then if I switch over to the live mode of my application, I can come in here and fill this out. So, it separates the first and last name. When I do the email, it's going to check that I actually do like the @ symbol and a dot in there somewhere. Phone number, I'm not putting my real one. And I will choose the bad plan. And my company, I'll just call Dylan Corp. And then my address, I could put in something like the address here, Pleasanton, California, 94588. Great. Okay. So I'll submit that. Cool. And then other thing is, when you build a form in your Creator app, it always comes with a report that gets auto-generated inside Zoho Creator. So this is the customer form. This is the customer report. I can then come in and change this if I want to, but this is just like the most basic way to view the data in your database or your application, is this report that we call a list report. So we're ready to move on to the next thing, right? So there are 3 types of relationships that you can build in any kind of application or database. So the first one is a one-to-one relationship. And so a one-to-one could be one person has one passport, and that passport only belongs to one person. That's an example in the real world, right? Or a book has one ISBN number, and that ISBN number only refers to that one book. If it didn't, it would be complete chaos. So a one-to-one relationship is pretty straightforward. But there can also be a one-to-many relationship. So with the one-to-many relationship, one example could be like one person has many outfits, but each of those outfits is only worn by one person. So another example could be like one book has many pages, but each page only belongs in that one book. And so when you're trying to figure out what type of relationship something should have, what kind of relationship two entities need to have in your application, is not enough to just read it one way. You also have to read it back the other way, and that is the best way to test if you have found the right relationship. So that's why I always say like one book has many pages and each page has one book. It has to make sense both ways, or you have chosen the wrong kind of relationship. So the other thing to note here is that sometimes you want a one-to-many relationship if there's just any possibility of there being a many, right? And sometimes you just want a one-to-one relationship. So what do I mean by that? So one company has many employees, and each of those employees only has one company. So if I'm building an application to keep track of everyone in my company, and I know everyone here is just exclusive and they only work at my company, that's a reasonable relationship to create. But what if I'm the US government and I'm building an application to keep track of all the jobs that everyone has in the entire country? Maybe there's some people that work for more than one company at the same time. And so actually, it would be more like a many-to-many relationship for an application like that. And so what's important to know about data relationships is that there is not one steadfast way to create these necessarily. So it depends on the context of your application, right? So if I need an application where I need the ability to associate a one-to-many, then I need to build that in. Or if I need an application where it's possible that somebody could have multiple companies at once, I need to think about that. So you have to consider the context. Don't consider like your example in a vacuum of like every possibility in the universe. Is it possible that one outfit could be worn by more than one person? Yeah, it is possible, but it's not necessarily relevant. Okay, so a few examples of many-to-many relationships. You could have like customers and products, right? So a customer potentially buy many products from you, and each product that you sell could potentially be bought by many customers. So it is possible that you could have a customer that only buys one product from you, but it's still going to be a many-to-many relationship because a lot of your customers are probably buying more than one, and you probably want to keep track of that. So anytime you need the potential to record that many relationship, that's how you know that you need it. So another example could be projects and employees. So each project could have multiple employees working on it, and each employee could be working on multiple projects all at once. So that would be a good many-to-many example. All right, so now let's take a look at how we actually build relationships. So the way that you build relationships is with lookup fields. What's special about the lookup field, other than the fact that it creates a relationship, is that it can be represented as any number of those like drop-down, checkbox, multi-select. So there's 4 different ways to represent it. And so what you need to remember is once you figure out what kind of relationship something is supposed to have in your application, then a one relationship would just be like a radio or a drop-down because you're only allowed to choose one of the things. And a many relationship would be a multi-select or a checkbox because you can choose multiple things. So that's an important thing to keep track of once you've decided what relationship you're going for. So now let's see how we can build that relationship between this form we just built, the customers, and the jobs like Taylor was talking about. So I can switch back over to my application here, and I can go into the builder mode. And let's go onto our jobs form. and I can see all the information we want about the job, including the new time field coming soon, which allows you to pick just a time, not a date and time. So if I want to relate this to customers, then I can scroll down this big list of fields and find the lookup field. And I can drag that on. And then when I go to create my lookup, I can choose which application I want to look up data from, so it can go across any Zoho Creator app in my account. And then I can choose which form I want to relate, so I'm going to choose customers. And then I can choose which field I want to display. So basically, I'm adding a field onto my job form. So every time I am entering in a job that I'm doing, I want to be able to pick from a list which customer. So how do I want to pick them? Do I want to look up their address? Probably not. I would probably want to know like either their company name or just their name, depending on how I'm running my business. So that is what will show up in my lookup field. All right, and then the display type is the last important choice to make here. So this is where we get to choose whether it's like a one-to-many or a one-to-one kind of relationship. So in this case, each job is only going to be associated with one customer, so I'll just choose the drop-down, but I could choose the radio multi-select checkbox. Okay, so I'll hit done there, and that has been added on to our form. And now if I come over to my jobs form, I could add in a job, and I can look up my employees and associate multiple employees who are working on it. I can say when it starts and stops, and there's that new time field. And if I wasn't lazy, I could maybe make a workflow that auto-calculates the hours worked based off of the start and stop. But I can come in here, and now that customer that I entered earlier shows up in my drop-down. So there's Dylan Mahood, and because I chose name as the display value, that's what we see instead of some other information about Dylan Mahood. So I'll enter in this job, set it on October 3rd. Cool. So if I come over here into my jobs report, now let's say because I've built this relationship, I want to be able to look at my list of jobs and also see which customer those jobs are for. So how can I do that? Well, I can go and edit this report. So this takes me back into the builder mode, and I can configure the fields for this report. And so if I click on the Add Fields button, we now see that customers shows up. So I can choose that. And if I wanted to rename that, I could rename that by just clicking on the T and changing it to customer, singular. And also, because it's a lookup field, we get this option, which is kind of hard to see, but it says link to view. So I can choose this and choose my customer's view. And so let's take a look at the results of doing that. So we'll come back to my report, and I'll refresh it. And so now we see this new job that I just added right here. It lists the customer who it's for, but also you'll see that my name shows up in this green, so that indicates that it's a link that I can click on. So I can click on my name, and I can see all of this additional information about this customer. So not only now can I see which customer goes with each job, but I have a convenient way of clicking in and pulling up the phone number of that customer if I wanted to. But now let's say, I don't want to have to even click in. I want to make this even a little bit easier. So I can come back to my report builder, and I can go to configure fields for web. And because I have built that relationship, when I click add fields, I can scroll down here, and now I can actually drag on any of the fields that go on that customer form because it's been related to the job. So if I just wanted to have his phone number up and ready to go, and I don't even want to have to click in to be able to see it, then I could just add on the phone. So now when I refresh this, we see another column shows up. So now we see Dylan is right there, but also we see his phone number, and I could click that and dial it in FaceTime if I wanted to. All right, so that was pretty useful. So we built our relationship. An important thing to note about that relationship is that lookup relationship goes in one direction. So what does that mean? It means that because I've added a lookup on my jobs form that looks up customers, I can add customer data onto the view of my jobs. But that does not mean that I can go into my customer report and pull in job data when I'm looking at a customer. So I can look at my job and see, yeah, this job was for Dylan Mahood. But then if I go to my record and I look at Dylan Mahood, there's not going to be any way for me to see, oh, Dylan Mahood, I did these 5 jobs for him. And that's because I've only built one half of the relationship, just going in one direction. So if I wanted to be able to see this data from either part of my application, then I would have to go in and I would have to add a second lookup field. So to create a complete two-way relationship, to be able to see the related data from either place, you have to use 2 lookup fields. Sometimes we call this a bidirectional lookup field. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to get to. So what happens if we need information about a relationship that we've established? So for instance, if I come over to my application, and let's say, when I am adding in a job, I also want to relate this to all of the items that I've installed for a customer. So there could be multiple items. So obviously I might want to just go and add a lookup going to my items form, and I would want it to be like a multi-select. And I can add that in, and now when I go to my jobs form, I can relate, we installed these 3 items for the job that we did for Dylan, and we spent, 100 hours doing it or something. This does establish the relationship, but the weakness of doing this is that I don't have any information about that relationship. So I can see, yeah, I did a job for Dylan, and I installed a MacBook Pro and a router, but I don't know how many MacBook Pros, I don't know how many routers, I don't know what those things cost me. So what if I want to create a relationship, but also have some additional context about that relationship? So there's actually a better way to do this. So I'm going to delete that lookup field that I just created, and instead I am going to add a subform onto my main form. And so this subform, there's a couple options here. So I can do a blank form, or I could do an existing one. So if I did my existing item form, that wouldn't really be useful to me, because all that would be doing is allowing me to create new items each time I am doing a job. I don't want to be able to create new items. I just want to be able to say, these were the existing items that are associated with this job. So that's not going to be useful. But I can do a blank form, and this could be something that's useful. So I'll rename this items installed, and then I can add a field onto my blank form. And so it gives me this little search bar, and I can type in lookup. And so I can add a lookup on my subform, which points to the products. And if you're feeling a little lost, don't worry. You'll get this in just a second. And let's say, I also want to know the quantity. Oops, I'm typing quantity, but I mean number. So I want a number field to record the quantity of items that I am installing for this customer. So let's take a look at what that subform looks like here. So I'll reload my jobs form, and now we see this subform down at the bottom. So I can come in and I can do a job, and I can say, okay, I installed the Epson printer, and I installed 5 of them. And I can add another row. I can say I installed the MacBook Pro, and there was 3 of those. And I installed the router, and there was 1 of those. And this allows me to associate those items with the job record, but it also allows me to get that extra information that I want to have about this item. So, I can say which employees worked on this. I can say which customer this job was for, how many hours we spent, etc., and I can submit that. So now, when I look at my jobs report, nothing new has appeared. Why do I not see anything new? The reason is because I have added a field and I have not updated my report. So every time you add a field to a form, it's not automatically going to show up on an existing report. You have to go in and add it yourself. So I will come in here and I can go to my jobs report and I can configure the fields for the web and I can add in my items installed subform. And also that link to view, I could enable that if I wanted to as well. And so let's see what that did for me. So I'll reload this. And now we see we have a job record with the customer, the phone number, and the items that we installed for them, but we're still not seeing the quantity that we've added on. And so this one is a little bit buried in the interface, but it's super useful to know about. So the items installed subform here in my settings, if I want to show more than just one field from that subform, I have to come into my settings, select my subform, and then I have to come in and click this display value where I can now add in some other field from that subform. And so that's where the quantity has been hiding. So I can add that. And now let's go back to the live report. And now we have the complete information that we were looking for. So we can see the customer, but also how many of each item were installed in that particular job. So it now lists the name of the item along with the quantity. Very cool. So combining lookups and subforms allows you to have like the maximum flexibility when you're creating that kind of relationship. And that is all I have time for. Thank you very much.